So welcome everybody to Life in the Garden. Thank you for joining us. It's awesome to have you. So many familiar faces here today. There's also some very esteemed company here today. We have published author sitting in the back there, Sarah Key. Stand up. Sarah Key. She writes serious South African fiction. Lots of. Sarah, stand up.
Hi, Sarah.
Come on, Sarah, stand up.
Very famous.
Hiding very inconspicuous over there is ex-Sunday Times. You know, there's no Sunday Times anymore, is there? I don't know.
There is?
Is there? Do you still write for them?
No way.
Okay. Is published author Gus Silver.
Yeah.
Over there is a one day to be published author, Deborah Ho Chung. Anyway, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Leslie, why are you hiding there?
I'm not hiding, I'm just quietly sitting here listening.
I'm going to start chatting to, this is Steven Sidley, by the way, everybody, just in case you thought this was a strange guy sitting next to me, like, because he wants to. You can't blame him, I'm so fabulous. Anyway, so I'm going to chat to him in a minute, but first I'm going to tell you about these. This is not the book, but anyway. The 10th of June.
Yes.
Conversations with a Gentle Soul. Really looking forward to this. We've just lost Uncle Kathy, and I think when I saw this book was available and the author was available, I thought, let's nab her. So, Veronica, I discovered she's a Pan, and she's a friend, so I've got a friend, Pan McMillan, for a change. So, I don't have to deal with Reno anymore. Very grateful. And then, this is not the book, but Michael Stanley, who are two authors, Michael Sears and Stanley Trollope, have got a new book coming out at the end of the month. Well, I think it's coming out now. No, June. Sorry, we're talking about June. Their book comes out next month, mid-month, I think, and they will be here. Well, one of them will be here. I don't think Stanley Trollope will be here on the 24th of June. It's not Death in the Family. I'm just showing you that they have other books, and I love his books. He writes about a detective in Botswana called Detective Kubu, and they're just fabulous, fabulous books. But now, let's talk about this fabulous book. Hello, Steven Sidley.
Hello.
Welcome
Boykey.
to...
Boykey.
And you want Boykey?
Boykey, yeah.
It's so funny because John Burks is Boykey.
Yeah, but I'm the real original.
You're not as old as he is. Don't say
Still stolen.
Did he steal it?
No.
No, just check. It's spelled differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had an American mother, so she didn't understand the TJ.
So it's actually Boykey. It's Steven said Boykey Sidley. It's on your birth certificate. No.
It's electric.
Okay. Just check.
I had an agent when I got my first deal, and she said to me that Steven Sidley sounds like an English anti-Semite, and I should stick with it. James Hedley Chase.
Oh. So should we do it in that kind of an accent?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Tell us who you are. How did you get into writing? Because I mean, I've had a few emails from people that know Steven from the past, or know our Boykey from the past, and I even said to you, things have got around. So who are you, and where do you come from?
Okay, so I got into novel writing by accident, and after a time at an age when one should probably think better about these things. My entire career was spent in areas which are very far away from literature, other than the extent of reading that I did. And the extensive reading that I did when I was a child was not so much a consequence of the fact that there was nothing else to do when I was growing up. There was no cell phones, etc., and there was some very bad TV. But I had an American mother who would leave books on my bedside table from a very young age. In fact, many of those books were probably beyond my comprehension, but I was able to read enough of them so that when I did get old enough to understand them, I could go back to them. And because she was from the east coast of America, the books she would leave next to my bed were Norman Mailer and Philip Roth and John Updike and Joseph Heller and E.L. Doctorow and the great American intellectual authors. And that is what I thought literature was, until I sort of went to school and was forced to read some of the books, which were probably less exciting.
Like Hamlet.
Well, that was pretty exciting. Hamlet was pretty exciting. Some of the other ones were dead awful. There was one particular author that she gave to me, and when I read that book, I'm going to make you wait for the line, the name of the author, I decided not only did I want to write, but I wanted to be that person, and I wanted to be the characters in the book, and I wanted to be the sort of darkly humorous, literate, comic noir life that was described in his novels, and that was Mordechai Ruckler, who is a Canadian author, and I commend you, any of you who have never read Mordechai Ruckler, it's the apprenticeship of Dudley Kravitz and St. Baines Horseman, and I then put that all aside and moved on into a bunch of other things that had nothing to do with literature, and I moved to Los Angeles at the age of 24 and spent most of my adult life there, which is why my books are mainly set in Los Angeles. I come back here when Mandela gets released, not because he got released, there was a family emergency, and then I met my wife, and then Mandela was released, and great optimism in the air, and I decided I want to come back to South Africa. It's where I grew up. And during the course of the next few years, we got into the habit of going down to the Eastern Cape for a holiday every year. And there were 4 or 5 families who would rent houses, a little vakansie-oord called Cannon Rock near Kenton. And the days were full of feral children, and the nights were whiskey and wine-fueled dinners at a very long table with a lot of people with large opinions, and we would fight and argue about every subject imaginable. On one particular night, my friends decided to bait me. And because I had had enough to drink, I took the bait instead of just sloughing it off. And it was on a particular subject about science, which is something that I know a little bit about. I have a Master of Science, and I feel fairly strongly about the veracity of science. And they started going for me until the smoke poured out of my ears, and I stripped my moor, which I never do, and I went storming out the dinner party, telling my wife I didn't want to be friends with these people anymore. The next morning, of course, everything was fine. But about 3 weeks later, I wrote them and started to write my friends an email, a hermetically sealed, logical, rational email eviscerating their position. And as I got about a page into this email, it started to look like the first chapter of a book. And I just kept writing, and Entanglement came out the back. So that was my first novel. Now, I didn't expect Entanglement to go do anything more than be a self-published book, which I could force my wife to read and have a few other friends pretend to read. But the book broke through and won the UJ Award and was shortlisted for Sunday Times. And it's fact largely to do with my wife, who is a professional writer, that this seemed like something that was a worthwhile activity, probably more worthwhile than anything else I could possibly imagine, and it just ran from there.
Is there any kind of competition at home in terms of writing? I mean, Kate is also a published author, very well known, and here comes her upstart husband and starts producing award-winning novels.
Is that why she's annoyed with me? No, no, there really isn't. In fact, there was a period between my 3rd and 4th book where.
You're going to say my 3rd and 4th marriage.
Yeah. Well, it gets close to that, because what happened was I wrote a book which turned out to be unpublishable and unsalvageable, and my publisher said to me, "Don't give up your day job," which I had already done. And I sunk into this terrible depression, and I lay down in a fetal position in the corner of the room, and I wouldn't get up for 6 months. And finally, I said to Kate, "Let's write a play together," my wife. And so we started writing this play, and we got divorced 3 times on the first page. So in terms of competition, our separate writing, there isn't really. In terms of collaborating, it was difficult. We broke through, we managed to do it, we got the play produced, but no, not really at all. She's very supportive. She's my first reader and first editor whenever I write.
And what's it like having a place where 2 people are writing? I mean, do you write at different times? Are you a morning writer? Is she a nighttime writer?
No, she's far more disciplined. She writes for a living. I'm talking about writing for columns and magazines, etc., etc. So she gets up in the morning and goes into the office in the room and she writes. I write in the gaps, which is completely different. So we don't overlap hardly at all.
Yeah. She missed my comment. She was inside at the time.
I'm trying.
Just throw it over your shoulder. Give it to Tanya. I mean, who are you? I don't know. Tanya's mother. Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah, those bloody Canadians, they just don't know when to shut up, eh? I mean, really. Anyway, so now where was I? Oh yes, I was studying the virtues of living at home and writing at home. You've given up IT work? No. Are you still working for a living?
As I was just discussing with your beloved book dealers over here, you don't make a living as a novelist unless you get a bestseller in the United States. So no, I'm still involved in all sorts of other things, but all of the other things are peripheral to the metaphysical, the existential pleasure of sitting down and doing something like this. But this is certainly not for money, and it wouldn't support the exorbitant lifestyles of my teenagers. So
you're saving for weddings, are you?
Yeah.
I read Imperfect Solo about a month ago, which is the book prior to this one, and I finished reading this one this morning, in fact. And there's a very definite theme in your writing. You have passions. One of them is music. And I see it. Are you a musician?
Yes.
What do you play?
I've been a jazz sax player for about 40 years.
Okay, because that comes through loud and clear in his writing, because there's that. And therapy. I firmly believe that everybody should be in therapy at some point in their lives, if not their whole lives. Who's the therapist in your family?
There isn't one, and was there a therapist in Imperfect Solo? Yes, his wife.
Yes, his best friend.
Is there a therapist? Yes, God, there's a therapist in both of them. Okay, the reason for that is a psychologist for a novelist is just a wonderful mirror on which to reflect moral issues. And I didn't realize I'd used in 2 books in a row. I think one makes an appearance in my very first book as well. But the therapist in this book is a good mechanism within those 2 characters, the therapist and the person who's in therapy, to engage in a conversation about some themes surrounding the book and to have it be explored properly. Yeah. So it's a device, and I'm not necessarily looking to go into therapy myself, but I have very, very many friends who are in therapy. By the way, one of my best friends says everybody should be in therapy.
Everybody should be in therapy. It's remarkable.
But it's a good device for a novelist who wants to explore themes at length. And so you'll see it happen in both of these books.
This is a little bit of a, let me use the term very loosely, older crowd sitting here. Who actually knows what podcasting is? Wow. Okay, you've blown me away. So I did some interviewing. A friend of mine, John Taylor, started a little online radio station. And I was sitting at the table with him and Britt when we were playing. They were like, should we call it Northcliffe Radio? Should we call it The Hill Radio? So eventually I said, why don't you call it Niche Radio? Because then you can do anything. And Niche Radio was born. They have a little media company, and he's actually he works for the SABC and does sports and stuff, so he's not here. I actually asked him to come and talk a little bit about podcasting, to give you a bit of an insight into that. But anyway, he wasn't available, and neither was Britt in the end. So you've got me, who kind of did there for a little while until I realized that it's just not for me. I went out and I interviewed a whole lot of people. Did I ever interview you, Sarah? No, never. Nobody here. You're all like, I didn't crack you. I did, guys. What was it like, guys?
It was very fun.
Was it fun? Yeah.
Listen to that.
Did you?
Yes, you sent it.
Did I? Wow. Wow. Okay, so basically podcasting, for those of you who don't know, is where you go and you record something and then it gets uploaded to the internet and people download it and listen to it. Instead of listening to the radio, you can now pick and choose what you fancy listening to. How did your interest in podcasting start?
Okay, I have quite a bit to say about podcasts. I want to tell you some stats first. There are 250,000 podcasts right now to choose from. So the spectrum of subjects that you can download are just endless, even more so than a library. Second of all, the original world of podcasting, which was started by a program in Los Angeles in 2002 or thereabouts, has changed in that podcasts of today, the best of them, are just beautifully produced works of art. Podcast used to be the recording of a radio show. That's all it was for later download. And still, very much, if you go onto 702 or any of them, you can download a podcast of somebody's radio show. But the best of the podcasts are pre-scripted and post-edited. So they drop in sound effects, and they drop in music, and they drop in the ums and the ahs and the spaces, and what comes out is this beautifully packaged piece of work. And I discovered them, I've always known about them, but I discovered their pleasure about 5 years ago when I bought a car that had a Bluetooth connection, and my iPhone could then, I didn't have to, do anything. I just got in the car and I played. So I uploaded a podcast called This American Life. This American Life being one of the first and one of the most famous podcasts. And I remember getting home from wherever I was driving and refusing to get out of my car until that podcast was finished, because it was so utterly magnetic to listen to that. And then it just rolled from there. The other statistic, which is extraordinary, not for South Africa, but the States, 50 million Americans listen to one podcast a month. 35 million Americans listen to four podcasts a month. That is more Americans than read newspapers or books. So it is a massive media industry now.
So how does it generate funding?
Advertising.
Okay.
Okay.
And
They
sponsorship.
have- yeah, well, there are sponsored ones, but then the podcast kind of gets slanted towards a sponsor. The pure advertising ones, sort of, there's an ad at the beginning, and there's usually a little 30-second ad in the middle, and they carry themselves. But, you know, Serial, which is a podcast about a murder in New Jersey, was downloaded 120 million times. So this is a very new and fabulous arena. And I came upon I couldn't believe that nobody had written a novel with a podcaster at its center. So when that idea came from me, it just opened up a whole cornucopia of things to talk about.
Can I interrupt? Did you hear the last one that This American Life did?
The Hamlet one.
Yeah, the one that was, I listened to it in 8 hours. I've been.
Oh, you mean the one after Serial?
Yeah.
No, I haven't downloaded it yet. You binged?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to expand?
It started off from an email that a listener to This American Life sent to This American Life, and he said, my name, and I've just forgotten his name, is, and I live in Town. That's what he said. And the guy's interest was piqued, and he worked on it for about 3 years.
Yeah.
And it is the most remarkable thing, how he met him, how the friendship developed. And I know my nephew and I listened to This American Life, and we used to listen to serials, and he's a lawyer. So I say, so what do you think? Do you think he was guilty? And I'd love to know if you think he was guilty. Because I do think he was guilty. And he thinks that the friend
was guilty.
has a lot more to do with it than ever was said. That this is all part of that serial thing. But he said to me, he's limiting his time. He's listening to it an hour a day, and I have to tell you, I stayed up all night.
I'm up to 3 hours a day on podcasts. I long for a traffic jam, literally.
So do you
When I go to gym, I go to the same gym as the book dealers. And when I go to gym now, used to go to See to My Health. I go there so I can sit on that bicycle and pedal sort of pallidly while I'm listening to podcasts for an hour. It's become very central to my life.
So you've actually got to find a way that you can multitask while you're doing it.
It's very difficult to multitask with anything else, though, because listening takes a fair amount of concentration. So being in the car and sitting on a bicycle and pedaling are two perfect ways to do it.
Washing the dishes.
Yeah, that'll do it.
I have the cleanest house ever. I really do. All the time. But I listen to more than 3 hours a day. I mean, I've just looked now, and my podcast today, it says 16 podcasts. On a Saturday, which is less than on a Friday, where I listen to the New York Times.
I'm starting to feel a bit ashamed. I don't listen to one.
No, there are podcasts. There are podcasts on every conceivable subject. So there are the New Yorker fiction series would be short fiction. There are science podcasts. There are podcasts about art. There are podcasts about history. There are podcasts about psychology. Just whatever strikes your fancies, and the best of them are just works of art.
Okay, so let's talk about the podcast about Max Lurie.
Okay.
So Max is the protagonist in this novel.
Okay.
So where's he come from?
So Max Lurie lives. He's 33. He lives in Los Angeles. Once again, I'm very comfortable. I lived there for a long time. I understand that part of the world quite well. And he has been a failure as a novelist and a failure as a psychologist, and I may get a chance to read a little piece of that. And as sort of a last attempt at finding a career, he goes out to buy a microphone and some recording software to put it on his Macintosh so he can start a podcast, because it's cheap and easy. And to his great surprise, the podcast becomes a runaway success. It's a podcast about his life. It is a narcissistic, navel-gazing podcast about his life. And for some reason, it captures the zeitgeist, and everybody wants to listen to this podcast. And at the opening of the book, it's the 1-year anniversary of the podcast, and he has 50,000 listeners, and he has an advertiser or two, and he's got a quaint little salary coming out of it. But the problem is his life is as dull as dishwater. So he starts making up and embellishing his life in his podcast. For instance, in the very first podcast, which opened the books, he talks about this gorgeous girlfriend that he has and how they dated and what happened at the end of the first date and what happened at the end. He actually hasn't had sex for 3 years. He hasn't had a date for 3 years. And the embellishment of his life to make it interesting for his audience is what gives the book its narrative tension, because his real life he has no control over. His digital life, he controls the narrative, and sometimes those two things run head into each other. An example of which is very early in the book. he decides to buy a gun off the dark web. And I go into a description of what the dark web is. Very easy to buy a gun off the dark web for anybody, by the way. I've done all the research. And that gun, as anybody who knows their Chekhov knows, if you introduce a gun in the first act, you must use it in the third act. And that gun is the rails on which the book travels. What is going to happen to this gun? And all of the rest of the themes around the book, which is dementia and Alzheimer's, which is schizophrenia. There's a major character who's a homeless person with schizophrenia, which is an inappropriate love affair with a very, very young girl who's almost illegal, which is his relationship with his dying father and his Asperger's sister. All of these things are wrappers around this rail of what happens to that gun.
I found the homeless guy particularly fascinating. I really enjoyed it was like, because you don't give homeless people the time of day. You really don't. And he makes an effort with this guy, and I enjoyed getting to know him.
Yeah, and it has unintended consequences. And the reason why I got into this thing about the homeless guy is, first of all, we don't generally give the homeless people the time of day. We may give them some money. We almost never know anything about their lives. And there's a homeless guy living in an alleyway in Los Angeles down the road from his flat. And one day he decides just to nod at the guy, just nods at him as he walks past, because he always walks past him. And that starts a spark of a relationship. And he tries to deepen the relationship, and there are unintended consequences. And the reason I wanted to explore the theme of a schizophrenic homeless person is, I know my best friend, when I was growing up in Johannesburg, his brother got schizophrenia at the age of 21. And not the bizarreness of the behavior, but the loneliness of this guy who was trapped inside a space that not only couldn't he control, but when he wasn't having delusions, he knew he was schizophrenic. So schizophrenics usually know they're schizophrenic, and they dread the moment where the voices come. And I wanted to get into what it's like to be alone on the street and have this thing waiting for this thing in your head. And he carries the story along with the podcaster.
In your head, is there a parallel between his father's dementia and his schizophrenic homeless friend? Because you're both trapped in your head. And just, my stepfather has the beginnings of Alzheimer's or dementia. We haven't had it diagnosed yet. And I can see the confusion that he has, because he's losing his English. And I just wondered if you had a...
They're only related, by the way, this book sounds terribly tragic and dark. It's not, it's comic. They're only related in that they are both sort of expressions of mental ill health. One is mental health in the psychological sense. The other one is loss of capability in a dementia or Alzheimer's sense, but otherwise they're not connected. The theme of his father, and there are many people in this room I can know who have relatives who may be slipping into dementia or showing signs of forgetfulness, or even deep into dementia and or Alzheimer's. It's a terrifying thing, and what happens in the book is he hero worships his father even while his father is in the grip of this wild dementia. If you know anybody who's got dementia or Alzheimer's, sometimes they snap out of it. Just for a few minutes, they become completely lucid, and they drop in. And it's during one of those periods that his father tells him something that causes his hero worship of his father to just collapse. His father is not the person he expected him to be. Now, what does he do? The guy's got scared. Does he say something? Does he say something to his wife, who is in near grief? And that's a whole separate thread that gets carried around in the book.
Also a lovely little story there. I want to hand it over to the floor just now to ask a few questions, but I had one question, and I'm now stalling for time because I can't actually remember what the question was. So just give me 1 second while I think. Yes.
And I talk.
Let me tell you, MS does the exact same thing to your mind. The synapses don't all connect properly, and you start to lose. I lose words often.
I just want to, if you don't mind, I just want to mention to people here the other main character of the book, which is Bongani Maposa. I wanted to also, around this gun that sits at the center of the thing, explore the theme of being an outsider in a community. It takes place in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, which is near the beach. His producer's name is Bongani Maposa, who is this... I wanted somebody on the outside, so I said to myself, well, who would be an outsider to Ella? It's got to be an immigrant. Well, let me make him a black immigrant and a black South African immigrant. Let me make him a black South African immigrant who's gay. Let me make him a black South African immigrant who's gay and is tone deaf and hates music. and finally, who eats terrible food and can't stand the taste, and will eat any trash food that comes along. So I got this guy who really has an outsider's status, and he is utterly acerbic and wry and unscared of his boss, Max Lurie, and he also acts as another moral mirror, and the two of them have this very humorous clash right throughout the book, and Bongani Maposa from Alexandra Township is the means by which he transforms from a narcissist into somebody who's not.
That's now the second question I have for you. In your previous book, Imperfect Solo, I sent you an email afterwards and I said, you need to write a book about a character, a black guy. I think his name was Jonas. Is that right? Is his name Jonas? He's a big, huge black guy who people who are immediately scared of. You know, you walk into this big, huge black guy and immediately like, oh my God, I'm going to get mugged, murdered, raped, and sodomized kind of thing. And I felt that at the end of that book, because he's just such an amazing guy, that you needed to write a book about
bar at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, is that who you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, I felt he deserved. And now, having read this book, Bongani could also have a
book on his own.
It just kind of, they're like characters that they stand out. That you think, okay, you actually deserve to be a person in your own right.
Character in your own book. Your
characters, do they come from your life? I mean, do you know?
No, not all of them. As I mentioned, a couple of them, experience with Alzheimer's and schizophrenia, and a few others. His celebrity girlfriend who's in the world of digital marketing, that comes from her real life. But many of the others don't. I mean, Max the podcaster doesn't. So it's a combination.
How do you avoid it? I'll ask you that question because I'm writing a novel and I'm not very far. But everything that's happening in that book is people I know. So how do you actually get to a point where you're not writing about people you know and you're making them up?
Plagiarize other books.
Well, there's a couple of things in this book I actually like to put in mind. If you know, I tell you what you did teach me out of this book. When we were talking about guns, I didn't know, and I'm an artist, okay? I didn't know that Van Gogh shot himself.
No, man.
I swear, I didn't realize that he died from a gunshot. I mean, I knew he killed himself. But I did not, and I actually stopped the book, picked up the phone, and said, how did Van Gogh...
Oh, really?
It finishes the sentence for you. It actually says, and you write, it says, how did Van Gogh die? And then it's one word, gunshot.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. So thank you for that. In fact, in his previous book, there were 2 words I had to go and look up as well. It was like, okay, you're educational.
What do you mean? Am I?
Yes. For me,
Google
you're
is
very educational.
Google is the writer's best friend too.
How much research did you have to do? There's a lot of factual stuff in here.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the Franschhoek Literary Festival this weekend, and I was sitting with Leslie Pierce, who's written 22 novels and 11 million sales, and writes in a completely different genre than I do. But some of the books she's written are historical novels. And who's the other one who did the Booker Prize winner? The one, Disraeli and not Cromwell, that person. Hilary Mantel.
Oh, she there?
That's
so glad
no,
we got
she
to see
wasn't.
that.
I'm just saying the sort of people who can read 100 books of history in order to write a novel is a skill which is utterly beyond me. But to do the sort of research which was necessary, the history of podcasting and schizophrenia and dementia and some of the other things in here, Google is very easy to do it on, and so the amount of work is probably less than you would think it was to get some of these facts.
Well, it does sound like a lot of work went into it though. So
It's kind of fun. I mean, my second book was called Stepping Out. It takes place in Columbus, Ohio. I've never been to Columbus, Ohio. I took Google Earth and I drove around the city. I see Sarah nodding.
Have you not been to Hillbrow where your books are?
Sorry, Sarah, I've got to ask you a question if you don't mind me changing. We were talking about your Franschhoek. Somebody said that you've sold zillions of books. Is that kind of accurate? That you're a very successful author? No. No, okay. We'll keep telling people that.
No, I'd love to hear that. Perhaps I should have just said it's what I do.
It's interesting that you asked Sarah that because Michael Stanley have sold hundreds of thousands of books in America and Canada.
And nobody knows
them. Nobody knows them in South Africa.
That's the thing. I'm published by an American publisher
That's
in
right.
Detroit. And I don't get to, I have no control over seeing my sales figures except twice a year.
And the last person who sees the sales figures is the author. Yeah.
So I couldn't, but judging by my royalty checks, I'd say that was an exaggeration.
Anyway, you were talked about in glowing terms of Franschhoek.
See, I told you were famous. You didn't believe me when I said that. And he hadn't told me that. Questions?
Can I just ask something about the dark web because, funnily enough, listening to a podcast this morning, I think it was BBC World News. It was all about the dark web and how you can order drugs, and then it comes in the post and people review it. So if you're going to send bad drugs, you're going to get a negative rating, and therefore no one will buy your drugs.
That's right.
It's funny you should mention that.
So let me explain what the dark web is. The web that we see, which is your Internet Explorer or your whatever you use, or Chrome or whatever you use on your Macintosh, and you type in www.something and go to a site, those searches are trackable by almost anybody and by hackers. So you can't do anything illegal because you're at the risk of somebody. Google knows what you search. If you download a browser called Tor, T-O-R, it's completely untrackable. And the dark web's entry doorway is this browser called Tor. Because it's untrackable, you are free to sell or buy anything and never run the risk of getting caught by anybody. And one of the more amusing stories about it is you rate the drug dealer, but there are much darker sites where you can buy children on the web, for instance. You can buy babies and toddlers. It's a really, really terrible place. And he simply does it just so he can tell the story to his audience. But I start talking a little bit about what goes on in the dark web, and it's quite terrifying. And the dark web apparently is 98%. What we see on our normal browsers on the internet is 2% of the web. The rest is dark.
But now what I just can't get my head around is that you raped the bad guy. Like
Yeah.
you raped the guy who just sold you the gun.
Yeah, the sites look very similar to the ones you see.
And if you don't get your drugs to the guy on time, you get a 0 rating.
Blacklisted,
You get a
absolutely.
black mark. I mean, there was a whole podcast on it this morning.
And on the dark web, when you buy something, you buy with Bitcoin, and everybody wants to know what Bitcoin is. And yes, last week Visa announced a Bitcoin card, so this is legit currency now. If you had bought 100 rands worth of Bitcoin in 2009, it would be worth 72 million rand today.
I'm actually horrified because people offered me Bitcoin and I laughed.
You could
And so many people did. So many people did.
In fact, there's a guy, Harun Kola, and he proposed, he was all about Bitcoin, and I was like, what is this
What is
about?
this? Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's crazy. Anyway, any other questions?
Gus.
Steven, just sorry. Just curious, as a jazz musician, do you tend to write to music? Can you write to music? Does music influence the way you write?
I can't. I can't. I listen to music. Ever since I started being a musician, when I listen to it very, very closely. So it would interfere with my writing. In fact, I have a difficult time when there's music being played at a restaurant. Then I'm at. I can't talk and listen to music.
Some of the question, but does the rhythm of jazz in any way influence your writing? Because a lot of literature tends to, in some way, have a rhythm to it that is classical with jazz, or in your case, anything like that?
At the centre of jazz is improvisation, which is spontaneous, and I've been told that the rhythm of my writing sounds jazz-like, so perhaps it's true. I'll leave it for you to decide.
Can I ask, are you going to podcast this talk?
I haven't recorded, but Kim, you've recorded it, haven't you? So yeah, we could actually pop it up on the... What do you do with the recording?
I usually put them on YouTube.
Great, so if you'll share the link with me, then I'll put the link up on the event so that everybody can read it. Come on, give us a bookworm question.
Yes.
May I ask, what inspires you? Who inspires you to write? Do you have anyone who inspires you to write?
So there's two answers to that question. The first one, which you may not have implied, but let me say it anyway, is do I write for somebody? And I do. I don't write for a general audience. I write for an amalgam of 3 or 4 people I know. I put them into one body and I'm writing to that person. One of them is my wife. The other one's Rian Milan, who's been my best friend for 40 years. And I imagine what they would think if I wrote for them. Other people write for a general audience. Who inspires me to write? It continually changes. Some of the authors I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, who are the great American East Coast writers, were my inspiration for many years. But since then, there have been a whole lot of others, and more frequently so now, South African authors. I've underread South African and African authors. Having lived in the States and American mother, first I did the Americans, and then I did, Ian McEwan and or the Brits Martin Amis, and then came back to South Africa. So the inspiration usually comes from a single book that I've written, saying, geez, that was kind of fun, let me go chew on that one for a while. But no single inspiration. Kind of a nebulous sort of general inspiration.
And who are your favorite authors
At the moment.
Now,
at the moment?
you know, anything by Amos. Let me talk about a South African book or two that I've written recently, rather than my favorite. It's difficult to choose a favorite. There's, you know, there are about 20 authors that I can think of who. Yeah, there are about 20 authors I can think of, and they come out with a book. I'm at the store in a second, you know. But the two books I want to talk about is shortlisted for this year was Martin Winkler's The Safest Place You Know, which I think was.
Which one?
Mark Winkler's Safest Place You Know, which I think is one of the best books anywhere that I've read for 5 or 6 years. Higher recommendation. And the other one, which I had to read out of course courtesy because I was sitting on a panel with her, is a book that was not widely distributed here called Midwinter by Fiona Melrose. And I was just astonished to find out she was in South Africa. The book takes place on a farm in Norfolk, Suffolk, up there in the English lowlands, and it's astonishingly good. So I just want to recommend those two. There's another answer to your question from the other side. Who would I not read anymore? Somebody asked, which I think is a great question at a literary festival. So one of my favorite authors was Dave Eggers.
Oh, yeah.
And he wrote a book last year which was so bad. And the problem is you read one, it's like going to a restaurant, you have one bad meal, you never go back. I'll never buy a Dave Eggers book again.
What one was it?
It's the one where the woman runs away in a camper with her child, and I've blocked the
Because
name.
I've got one waiting to be read, so...
If it's a woman who has taken off to Alaska in a camper with her child to get away from her husband.
Okay, it's
Don't
got
read it.
Yeah, it's just awful.
a...
And I loved this guy, absolutely loved him.
I thought they were
Richard
about
Ford.
Clive Barker.
One more recommendation for you, Mum, and I promise you I didn't know it was Obama's favourite book until after I'd finished, which was Lorraine Groff's Fates and Furies from last year. Best read in 10 years. And then I found out it was Obama's best read.
She's just written another one.
Has she? Fabulous.
I'm interested in the part where you say that to explore a subject, the best way to do that is do it through therapy, or what was...
It's not the best. It's just a wonderful device to use to get inside a character's head, basically.
Yeah, I'm writing my book. It's about childhood sexual abuse, and I've actually chosen the setting to be the therapy room because I spend quite a bit of time there, and I found that quite interesting that you said that. So yeah, like confirmation that that's the best route to go, because I've submitted my book to a couple of places, and they've given me advice as to how to rewrite it, because I had a totally different approach initially, and I'm an activist on childhood sexual abuse, so I want to explore that, and I want people to be able to understand the extent of the damage that abuse actually does to somebody, and I think I finally decided that actually setting it in the therapist room probably.
You must be very brave. I try to stay away from children trauma things on TV and in books because I find it so traumatic. So you have courage.
But that's exactly where the problem lies, and that silence only tends to perpetuate.
Yeah, it does.
And us staying away from the taboo,
Yeah,
and not reading
does.
and wanting to hear about it, and
it does.
is exactly why it is perpetuated.
Yeah, thank you.
It's like Marilyn Cohen de Villiers' books about
Yeah, exactly.
spousal abuse in Jewish marriages. There's this perception that Jewish people don't abuse their wives, and it's absolute bullshit.
She blows that up big time. Doesn't
Yeah,
she?
and in fact Naomi Reagan, all her books are about how the ultra religious women are kept right down there with no rights and no. So I mean, yeah, it is something that needs talking about, and it does need to be blown open, and it is a very, very uncomfortable subject. And on that note, I'll tell you one of my most successful therapy sessions for me wasn't even. I had this hot therapist, my first therapist. He was gorgeous, but there was just something a little off, and I couldn't work out if he was straight or if he was gay. And one of the most mind-blowing things that ever happened to me is eventually I said to him, Anthony, are you straight or are you gay? He said, does it matter, and why does everything have to be in a box for you? And it was the most mind-opening answer I've ever had in my entire life. And it actually turned on the key. So everybody should go to therapy. Seriously. Just bouncing ideas. Therapists, listen, they sit there and they listen to your shit. I think half the time they're thinking about the rugby score or what's cooking for supper tonight or whatever. But they're there, and for some reason they are present, and they don't fall asleep usually. And something, you do get something back, because when you're talking, something comes back to you. Read for us, Steven Boykey Sidley.
Okay, so I'm very sensitive to long reads, so I've chosen 3, I may only do 2. The book is divided into basically 2 sections. There is the podcasts themselves, which are obviously told in the first person as he rants on about his whatever gets his back up, and then there's the sections in which we look at him from the outside. The book starts with the podcast. I'm only going to read a short part of the podcast. He starts off by saying, this is the National Podcasting Network. Welcome to Free Association. This is, as always, your host, Max Lurie. He then tells his audience that this is the 1-year anniversary and he's hit 50,000 and this is a complete shock to him and please keep listening. And he launches into a story about his girlfriend, but I'm going to skip that one. The point of his podcast for himself is he gets to rant on about whatever subject he feels like ranting on. In this particular case, my father is dying. I've mentioned this before. I have struggled with whether I should talk to you about this. It is obviously a subject of great import and anxiety for me. I love my dad, or at least the man he used to be before. Well, maybe I'll save this for another time. First, I have to wrestle the ethical dilemmas to the ground. Can I make my father's dying fodder for public consumption? At first pass, this would seem like a monstrous show of disrespect and callousness. Perhaps I will meditate on this. But death, both in its specific and general incarnation, is a terrific subject. Wide in scope, deep in consequence, loud and insistent in certainty. There is hardly a subject more important to us, I suspect. It hovers like an airborne pestilence. Everything we do is an attempt to mute it, delay it. We take out life insurance, buy cars with safety features, drive close to the speed limit, don't cross at the red light, eat healthy foods, applaud scientists foraging in our cells and looking for ways to extend and protect us. We hope that our governments will use diplomacy instead of death to negotiate nasty disagreements with those people over there. We take pills, we have our doctor's number on speed dial, we decide not to go white water rafting and avoid travel to Syria. We support climate change, reversal initiatives, because if we don't, we'll all drown or burn or asphyxiate. Death is fuel for at least half of the arts. That, and love, of course, but love is mutable. Death is not. Why is there not a podcast dedicated to death? It is the ultimate general interest subject. Maybe I should change the name of this admittedly nebulous recipe that makes up this podcast to enthusiastic coverage of death and dying. The podcast could interview people with terminal diseases, extract all sorts of wisdom from their truncated hopes and dreams. Talk to doctors and health workers who do battle with the beast every day. Gently probe the bereft as they try to deal with loss. Perhaps a scientific roundup of what kills us daily. Bad food, pollution, not enough exercise, murderers, cars, aging, stress, poison, wars. We could have an episode on famous eulogies, one on funerals, another on afterlife mythologies, great natural disasters and their tolls, euthanasia, genocide, patricide, infanticide. Oh, and an episode on the lighter side of death. I refuse to believe there's no humour somewhere. We can laugh at death, can't we? Maybe the most amusing last words or the most inept attempts at suicide. Actually, there are a number of websites dedicated to death jokes. I checked, and they aren't very funny because death is a very tough nut to crack in the humour department. I will talk to my producer, Bongani, my sponsor and distributor, change this podcast from general-purpose, navel-gazing, solipsistic nonsense to a wide-ranging, sensitive, and well-considered investigation of death and its dark omens and endless damage. I would change the name of the podcast from Free Association to what? An end? The end, an exploration, or death, a miscellany? No, these are terrible. Perhaps I could ask you to send in your suggestions for a podcast title. By the way, when I finished doing, I did this, my first podcast at my book launch. I did the whole podcast. In fact, I had an actor do it. I didn't do it. And somebody came running up in the garage to the actor afterwards, saying, "No, I've got a really good idea for the name of the death podcast." He thought it was a real Okay, so that's the sort of thing that he does in his podcasts. And then we moved on to, that's his own view of himself. We move on to what he did before he did podcasting. Once upon a very brief time, Max had been a psychologist. He sort of stumbled through Cal State, lurching distractedly from subject to subject, until he found something that he thought was sort of interesting. Sort of interesting was clearly a warning sign. Career should be pursued with a little more propulsion than that. But he had managed to shed inchoate interests in economics and maths and finance and history of art and philosophy and English literature along the way, and psychology was the last man standing. He was not especially disinterested in mental health or the healing of troubled psyches or the shrieky mutations of human behavior, but he was also not champing at the bit to have people reveal their innermost, most intimate darknesses either. On the other hand, sitting on an easy chair all day dispensing advice and wisdom seemed like a reasonable and comfortable life, so he slogged his way through his masters. By the time he had finished, he had become briefly impassioned by, and as quickly disillusioned with, the writings of Freud, Adler, Jung, Maslow, Skinner, Wundt, McClellan, and Marina. He had stuck his nose into psychoanalysis, humanism, cognitism, behaviorism, and functionalism. He had scratched noisily around industrial psychology, child development, group therapy, psychometrics, social psychology, cognitive behavior therapy, well-being, and therapeutic contexts. He floundered in the vast matrix of choices available, suspecting them, most of them to be verbose and convoluted expressions of common sense. On the other hand, he had enough humility to realize that he didn't know shit from Shinola. So he hung out a shingle and started counseling, relying on the kindness of some of his colleagues who sent him referrals. He sculpted an untidy hodgepodge of all his influences and dispensed what was likely a half-baked set of ill-formed therapies and impulsive suggestions and dubious wisdom. Still, people seemed to like him because his patients became deeply attached to him, and his practice became successful enough for him to bask in the glory of having a career in the art and science of healing. After a couple of years, he realized he hated it. This was brought home sharply when his patience ran out with a difficult patient. She had a startling obsession about her husband's infidelity, to the point where she was able to think of little else. Her obsession was unimpressed that her husband was quadriplegic, housebound and under constant care. When he gently suggested that it might not be practicable for her husband to cheat on her, she insisted that while she was asleep or at the store out for a run, he would be picked up and whisked away by all manner of eager woman lovers, and in her mind they were all much younger and prettier than she was. And he would be driven to a motel where they would engage in extreme sex of various startling derivatives, which she was able to describe in the most purple of prose. After hearing this for weeks, after his gentle suggestions of why this may not be so and why perhaps she was projecting her own desires and lack of fulfillment, he lost his cool and said, "Don't be silly." She burst into tears, marched out and threatened to report him to the authorities. He suspected he might not be cut out for this career. Also, nobody ever seemed to get much better, and he was completely at a loss how to proceed. He did not want to be part of a process that stretched out forever, and believed perhaps naively that the whole point was for patients to articulate their incapacity or melancholy or anxiety or other pathology, and then to seek its cause, assisted by his wide guidance, stare it squarely in the face, and then undertake an earnest and determined process of healing. It never seemed to work out that way, the way he hoped it would. Rather than cast aspersions on the whole field of psychology, Max blamed himself, and in many cases he referred patients to colleagues who seemed more certain about their approaches and outcomes than he did. But he was fascinated by his patients' stories for the most part, especially the ones at the end: the sexual indiscretions, the violence behind closed doors, the substance abuse, the deceit and dissimulation artfully constructed and deployed in the service of self. But he felt like a fraud, a stalker of tales. So he referred everyone out, took down his shingle, and decided to try his hand at writing, which we knew was a romantic and impractical notion. And when he went into therapy many years later, he found out it was much more satisfying to be on the couch. He